Welcome back to Psych-sip Sessions, Episode 3, Personality in a Cup, Unpacking Personality. I'm your host, Claire. Whether you're a returning or new listener to the podcast, I'm so glad you're tuning in. Today, we're diving into one of my favorite topics, personality. We're talking about what makes us tick, the unique quirks about us, and what makes us unique, the way our personality shapes the way we see the world, and how we interact with others. So, with me today, I have
Hazel.
and
Isaiah.
Would you guys like to introduce yourselves?
So my name is Hazel. I'm a first-year student at the University at Buffalo, and I'm a psychology major.
So my name's Isaiah. I'm a year 1 student at the University of Wollongong, and I'm also studying psychology.
I see. So, what do you guys like to do in your free time?
Well, as of now, I've really been enjoying crocheting, although I have a lot of unfinished crochet projects. And I also enjoy reading a lot, so those are my two main hobbies as of now.
And for me, so it's holiday season for me now. I'm not studying, so I'm just around the house, and I just like to cook once in a while. So recently, I've made meatballs and pasta. So it was amazing. So good.
Thank you guys for introducing yourselves. And of course, we can't forget the most important part, what's in the cup today. So I'm sipping on a cozy matcha latte while my go-to comfort drinks. What about you guys?
So for me, I have a cup of kopi. So if you've not heard of kopi before, it is a coffee mixed with condensed milk and sometimes a little bit of evaporated milk. So most often you see people drink this in the region of Southeast Asia.
So as for me, I'm drinking kopi o peng siu dai. So basically, that would be iced black coffee, less sugar. So the O means there's no milk in it, and siu dai would mean less sugar.
Okay, so today we'll be diving in about personality. Let's start by talking about why understanding personality is so important. Think about it. Your personality shapes how you see the world, how you interact with others, and even how you approach challenges in life. By understanding our personality, we can uncover deeper insights about ourselves, which can lead to personal growth and more meaningful connections. For instance, knowing your strengths and preferences can guide career choices, like whether you thrive in a collaborative environment or prefer working independently. It also helps in relationships, understanding your tendencies and those of others that can help improve communication and reduce conflict. Let's not forget mental health. Recognizing aspects of your personality can also help you manage stress and build resilience. So, what exactly is personality? Let's break it down. In psychology, personality refers to the unique patterns of thought, emotions, and behaviors that define each individual. It's what makes you, you. Personality is shaped by a mix of genetic, environmental, and social factors, and it includes traits like introversion versus extroversion or openness to new experiences. What's fascinating is how these traits create differences in the way people perceive and respond to the world. For example, someone high in conscientiousness might excel in organized settings, while a person with high agreeableness might be a natural peacemaker in social situations. Personality is complex and colorful, so no two people are exactly the same, and that's what makes exploring it so exciting. Now that we understand the importance of personality, let's talk about one of the most important ways people explore it. Personality tests. Whether it's for fun or self-discovery, these tests are everywhere. But how reliable are they really? Let's take a closer look. First up is the MBTI, or Myers-Briggs Type Indicator. It's one of the most well-known personality tests, dividing people into 16 different personality types based on preferences like introversion versus extroversion or thinking versus feeling. While it's great for sparking self-reflection and discussion, the MBTI has its critics. Research has shown that it lacks reliability, and this means that your type might change depending on when you take the test, and it doesn't always predict behavior accurately. What do you guys think? Or what are your experiences with the MBTI specifically?
Okay, so I've taken the MBTI test quite a few times, but I haven't done it in a while. My MBTI is ENFJ, but I measured it quite a while ago, maybe 2 years back, and I don't know, the words that they say does kind of make sense, but as I think about it and see how that relates to my day-to-day life, I started to go a bit more skeptical. Like, okay, is it really?
Right.
Yeah.
I think it's just like horoscopes.
Oh yeah, word.
It's like, they're really general and you can relate to it to a certain degree, but not fully. And sometimes it just feels like, are they making things up?
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Because, like, there's actually a cognitive bias known as the Barnum effect, if you guys are aware.
Yes.
So I feel like that's quite prevalent, especially in horoscopes, but also in, like, you know, those BuzzFeed quizzes, like, what kind of cupcake are you? I feel like it's apparent in lesser extents in, like, MBTI and, like,
Right.
Enneagram, because these have a bit more of, like, what people would consider scientific validity, though not as much as the big five. But like to a certain extent, a lot of these traits mentioned are very generalizable. So like that's why you may feel as though it resonates with you at first. But the more you consider like specific context, you feel as though perhaps this could just be relatable to everyone.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Definitely. And I think this bias, a lot of people might not know about it, you know,
Yeah.
especially if you're not a psych student. Would you like to explain more on this specific bias?
So it's just that like any set of traits, for instance, like you enjoy helping people, you are someone who's very sociable,
Right.
you are someone who enjoys having deep conversations. Whenever you are to do a personality test, the results would be somewhere along these lines. And a lot of people, huge segments of the population, could relate to a lot of these traits. However, individuals tend to believe that it applies very specifically to themselves. So that's why it's very easy to like relate to, you know, those Harry Potter quizzes or like BuzzFeed quizzes. I feel as though like a lot of it relates to you and explains your behavior uniquely. So while personality tests can help us gain greater clarity, sometimes it can lead to the opposite effect where people tend to relate very heavily to these generalizable descriptors and like cling very heavily and do not change their behavior for that. They believe like, oh, I'm just very introverted, so like I feel very drained all the time by like social interactions, you know? But there was like a study where they found that by asking introverts to act more extroverted for a period of time, they became happier. So like it shows that personality can change based on like the context and how you try to behave. But like if people were to read these descriptors and believe it applies very strongly to them, they are less likely to try to change their behavior.
Okay. I think that's a really good point. Thank you for bringing that up. And thank you for educating our listeners as well. Thank you guys for sharing. So I think the MBTI is really well known. I feel like nowadays it's almost comparative to horoscopes because of how it's just thrown around here and there for the better and for the worst. Okay, moving on to our next personality test I'll be addressing. We have the Enneagram, which looks at personality through the lens of motivations and fears. So this test specifically has 9 different personality types and it offers a more dynamic perspective, showing you how you might behave under stress or in growth. It's become a popular tool in personal and spiritual development, but then again, the scientific validity of it isn't as strong as some might hope. And the Enneagram test, I understand if you guys haven't done the test itself, it's well known, but not as well known as the MBTI. So have you guys heard of it or have you guys actually done it?
Yeah, I've done the test. So like the MBTI can divide people into very dichotomous categories, but I think that the Enneagram is definitely more dynamic because it shows that amongst the different Enneagram numbers, you can have like different levels of health. So like healthy ones, for instance, would behave very different from an unhealthy one. Not only know like how as a one you would behave, but like how you would behave if you were under stress or like in different, you know, in different like levels of health. And also it shows you how like in periods of stress you're more likely to move towards another number. They say like you would disintegrate to like a different number, whereas in a period of growth you would be more likely to integrate to another number, meaning you adopt the healthy habits of another type. Whereas like the negative one, you start to adopt the negative qualities of another type. So I feel like that level of like integration among the different like numbers definitely is more like dynamic than just putting people into boxes. Yeah.
What do you think, Isaiah?
I think Hazel, you brought up such a great point. You talked about how in different situations of your life, you might relate closer to a specific number, whereas like say you're on high stress versus low stress, you might respond in different ways. I think it's such a great thing that we will explore later on, whether or not personality is fixed versus how fluid it is. And yeah, I think we'll save that for later, but we'll continue on with the personality test.
Definitely. I actually personally prefer the Enneagram test more than the MBTI because it captures the dynamics of how personality can be instead of, oh, you're just one of 16 different types. But unfortunately, I don't know enough on the Enneagram to comment on much. So, moving on, another popular personality test. Finally, we have the Big Five traits, often considered as the golden standard in personality research. This framework assesses 5 core dimensions: openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Unlike MBTI or Enneagram, the Big Five is backed by decades of robust scientific research, making it highly reliable and widely used in academic and professional settings. But here's where things get tricky. These tests can sometimes be misused. For example, in workplace settings, MBTI or Enneagram test results are actually occasionally used to make hiring decisions. Are you guys aware of that?
Yeah, definitely. I had a friend tell me that she had to do the MBTI test as part of the application process, and she was not aware that it was being used to assess whether she was capable. So then the results basically said that she was too introverted for their company and she did not get hired. And not just in workplace settings, but I've had friends who have had the MBTI used to decide their roommates. And well, she was not very compatible with her roommate despite the MBTI. So I think that can show how it's not the best predictor of behavior.
So I was just doing a little bit of research and hearing around. So I know that the MBTI is relatively big in Korea.
Yes.
So I was just scouring the internet and I saw this really interesting post. Yeah, let me show you.
Oh, I heard that people have to put their MBTI in their resumes.
Yeah, so resumes are one. Sometimes dating profiles might also require that. But I thought it was so interesting. So, because I like food and I cook once in a while. So this post really struck me. Okay, we can see on the post here, these are donuts on the right side. And they used to spell out.
That's so cute.
Yeah.
INFP.
So that's INFP. So for our listeners, you can't see because I don't know how I'm going to show an image, but there is what seems to be pistachio for the I, chocolate for the N, an orange donut for the F, and some glaze for the P. And I'll be honest, this is the only 16 personalities that I will choose to consume actively.
I see. That's kind of bizarre, isn't it? They assign different donut flavors to different aspects of personality.
Yeah.
That's
I wonder if
crazy.
there's a deeper meaning to that.
Oh.
Is pistachio somehow related to
Right.
introversion?
Right, and how do they assign? Yeah. How is this related? Did someone just decide, I think introversion, pistachio here. How about extroversion then? What's,
What food is an extrovert?
What is the opposite of pistachio?
Oh. For me, it's lemon sorbet.
Lemon sorbet?
Yeah.
Why?
Because pistachios it's nutty.
Okay.
So
it's very rich. in,
rich.
yeah.
For me, it dries out my mouth
Okay,
quite a
okay.
bit. So something refreshing would be lemon, and something a bit more, I don't know, hydrating. I wish sorbets are hydrating. Would be a lemon
Okay.
sorbet. Yeah.
Okay.
That's really interesting. Thank you for sharing, Isaiah. I had no idea it was so widespread. So MBTI and Enneagram results used to make hiring decisions. I feel like that isn't the most appropriate given its lack of predictive power. And similarly, using a single test to define your relationship or identity can be limiting and even harmful. Personality is far too complex to be reduced to just a single label or category. So, while these tests can be fun and insightful, it's important to take the results with a grain of salt. Think of them as a starting point for exploration, not a definitive answer to who you are as a person.
The MBTI can be quite fun. I'm not going to lie. It's quite interesting to find out what these tests say about us. And I have in the past talked about like what my personality type was with regards to the MBTI. I have also tried to like suss out, what other people's MBTIs
Were
are
you
as well.
successful?
Like your
I-
friends.
Yeah, my
Okay,
friends,
okay.
I would say I got maybe 2 out of the 4.
Okay.
I know that there's also like that turbulent or assertive, at the end,
Assertive,
but
yeah.
I didn't really guess that. I just guessed the main 4.
I see.
Okay. Were your friends the type of personality that MBTI says you would be likely to hang out with?
Honestly, I think that's as far as like I
Okay,
I was like,
okay.
okay, hey,
Like,
I guess.
surprisingly, when I asked my friends to do the test, they were all the type that my MBTI said I would get along with. So that was interesting. But it could be that, like, in certain cultures, certain personality types are more common. So a lot of my friends were, like, introverts, for instance. And I think it's also, like, the setting, like, like-minded people attract. So we're all introverts.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, like interesting that you brought that up
Yeah.
because at one point, I think in my first semester in uni, I realized me and my entire friend group we shared the same personality type. We were all Enneagram type 9s and we were all
Oh.
INFJs.
Okay. So for, like, all my friends, I did not get as many of them to do the Enneagram, but, like, they were all within the same group of, like, people who are supposed to get along with each other. So we're all, like, ENFPs, INFPs, INFJs.
Oh, you're onto something.
yeah. And, like, 1 or 2 INTJs, but not as much. Yeah, so honestly, they were almost all INFJs and INFPs.
So the
Like,
FJs.
90%. Yeah, the FJs. Yeah, and that brings me to another point on, like, how these kind of personality types, although they may lack scientific validity, they can, like, create a sense of belonging. So, like, especially for these more, like, statistically rarer types, like INFP, INFJ, for instance, it can be difficult to find people with your personality type in your immediate circle. I mean, it's rare that it can be rare for some people. Like, I guess we're lucky to have all our friends be like us. But I guess for, like, these rarer types, when they do the tests and they realize there's a whole community of people who are just like them, it can be quite a new experience, given that a lot of these people would have grown up feeling misunderstood. Like, I'm so introverted and people around me are so outgoing. So I feel like that's one of, like, the benefits of this test, knowing that, like, although you feel misunderstood, there's actually a whole community of people out there who also feel misunderstood, and that paradoxically can make them feel understood.
I think like one thing beyond this test that I think is just so important is also getting to know the person. Like, as much as these tests can try to like distill the whole human personality into these different categories, I still think it's so important to just spend time with someone, get to know their character, get to know their values, and try to understand them in ways that you understand and how you make sense of the world, and not only through these tests itself. Yeah.
Let's take a deeper dive into personality by exploring 2 fascinating angles: how we perceive others and the interplay between our conscious and unconscious traits. First, let's talk about interpersonal perception and personality. How do we judge others' personalities? What do you guys think? Whether you realize it or not, we are constantly making snap judgments based on first impressions, how someone looks, speaks, or carry themselves. These judgments often rely on heuristics, or also known as mental shortcuts, which help us make quick decisions, but can also lead to biases. For example, the halo effect is when we assume someone is kind or competent simply because they're attractive. Or take implicit associations. Our unconscious bias might lead us to judge someone's personality based on stereotypes or past experiences, often without realizing it. The tricky part, these perceptions aren't always accurate. Someone who seems confident at first glance might actually be masking insecurity, or someone quiet might have a deeply creative personality that isn't immediately apparent. So, while first impressions are powerful, they are only a small piece of the puzzle. Now, let's shift gears to implicit versus explicit personality traits. Explicit traits are the ones we're consciously aware of, like knowing you're detail-oriented or adventurous. These are aspects of personality we tend to talk about and recognize in ourselves and others. Implicit traits, on the other hand, operate beneath the surface. These are unconscious drivers of behavior shaped by past experiences, social conditioning, or even genetic predisposition. For instance, you might consciously value independence, but find yourself unconsciously seeking approval from others due to past experiences. The interplay between implicit and explicit traits is what makes personality so complex. Think of it like an iceberg. What's visible above the waterline is only a fraction of the whole. Understanding this dynamic can help us gain more compassion for others and ourselves. Sometimes behaviors that seem puzzling or inconsistent are driven by deeper unconscious forces. What do you guys think?
Yeah, sounds like I think that makes it sound like there's like a monkey in my brain with a symbol and just like driving my whole body around. But okay, interesting. I think it sounds like there are two different ends. On one end is that there's this idea of our implicit personality, and on the other end, our explicit personality itself. So I think it's such an interesting question that I have in my head. Hazel, do you think that there is a way to change whether these personality traits are implicit versus explicit? Like, are they fixed, or are you able to make the implicit more explicit?
I feel like there are a number of ways to make our implicit traits more explicit. The personality tests that we just mentioned are perhaps one of the ways. Like, we have a number of characteristics that we may not be aware of, but like upon looking at our test results, we could gain greater awareness. How about you, when you did your personality test, do you feel as though that there were certain traits you were unaware of?
Yeah, so I did my Big Five personality test. So my scores for the 5 different traits are neuroticism is at the lowest. Then it goes to conscientiousness, openness to experience, extroversion, and finally agreeableness at the highest. So I thought that I was higher in conscientiousness than openness to experience. And when I saw that, I was like, okay, interesting. That's a part of myself I wasn't aware of. So this awareness helped me to understand that maybe I need to pay more attention to certain details. So when I'm doing like my essays, just still being a first year student writing my essays, my presentations, I would actually scan through my essays and what I wrote a couple times just to make sure that I got everything right, and dot my I's and cross my T's.
I feel the same way. I think that there are different dimensions. Each test has different dimensions, and some of these dimensions are perhaps traits that we have not consciously thought about. Like, for instance, I would not have thought about how my levels of neuroticism or openness to experiences is shaping the day-to-day events of my life. And even for the explicit traits that I am aware of, such as introversion, I feel that such personality tests gives us the language to be able to explain these traits both to ourselves and others. So perhaps, like, if you have never heard of the word introversion, you probably do not. You're aware explicitly that you feel drained by going to parties, by talking to friends, but not really aware of how to explain this behavior. But being able to know the word introversion, extroversion, or even for some, they relate to ambiversion, which is in between introversion and extroversion, then it gives them a way to understand, like, like the reason why I feel drained is because I'm an introvert. And then they can explain it to your friends who are more likely to understand.
I think that's so strong. Knowing your personality traits and being to articulate them, not just to yourself, but to other people. And that awareness, I find, is quite amazing.
Right, so personality tests are not all bad.
Yeah, so the Big Five test that I did was, I guess it's just one of the ways that worked for me to bring my implicit personality traits more to my awareness. But Hazel, are there other ways to do that?
I think that therapy would be another good way to bring a lot of your implicit traits to your explicit awareness, because a good therapist would talk to you and help you uncover why you behave the way you do. And once you are aware of the reasons why you behave in certain ways, in certain scenarios, you're more likely to be able to change that.
Now let's talk about something a little darker, because personality isn't all sunshine and rainbows. Every cup of coffee has its bitter notes, and every personality framework has its shadow side. Enter the dark triad. So the dark triad consists of 3 personality traits: narcissism,
Machiavellianism,
thank you. This is a word that I can't quite pronounce, and psychopathy. These traits are often associated with manipulative or self-serving behaviors. So, narcissism involves an inflated sense of self-importance and a craving for admiration.
Machiavellianism,
Thank you. Machiavellianism is characterized by cunning, strategic manipulation, and the ends justify the means mindset. Psychopathy, the darkest of the three, is marked by a lack of empathy, impulsivity, and a disregard for social norms. These traits can manifest in both social and professional settings, often in subtle ways. In the workplace, for instance, a
Machiavellianistic.
thank you, individual might climb the corporate ladder through strategic deceit, while a narcissist might dominate meetings to seek constant validation. Psychopathy might emerge as risk-taking behavior, often at the expense of others, and sadistic tendencies could show up as bullying or controlling behavior. So why are we as a society so fascinated with these traits? Looking at popular media, characters like Walter White from Breaking Bad or Joe Goldberg from You captivates us, despite, because of their darker tendencies. These traits often make for compelling storytelling because they tap into our curiosity and human extremes and moral ambiguity. However, it's important to remember that these traits exist on a spectrum. Not everyone who shows a glimmer of narcissism
or Machiavellianism.
or strategic thinking falls into the dark category. Recognizing these traits can help us better navigate relationships and professional environments, equipping us to set boundaries and protect ourselves from harmful dynamics. By understanding the dark side of personality, we can approach it with both caution and curiosity, acknowledging its existence while focusing on fostering healthier traits in ourselves and communities. What do you guys think?
So for those who do watch the Netflix
Breaking Bad?
series, like Breaking Bad or You, I think it's interesting to see how these traits might manifest in such social situations. But for those who are on TikTok, specifically if you're on Book Talk, I know this this genre of literature called dark romance.
Oh.
It just came to mind. It was so I was having a conversation with my friends on the train, and I started hearing about what dark romance was. And for those who don't know, so themes such as kidnapping, stalking, sometimes even sexual violence might come up in such books in dark romance. So part of me feels like these topics might be a bit taboo, and maybe it might be shunned upon to talk about in like societal settings. But I can see why it might be thrilling in such situations for us to read about it and for us to talk about it in media.
Right, but isn't that just the human curiosity?
Right, that's so true. It is really this part of our human curiosity. But as we do explore these topics, I think one thing to be cautious about is that it exists in fiction. These stories do exist in fiction, they do exist in real life as well. But we just have to be sure that the more we consume this media, it is not always an accurate reflection of what life is supposed to be like. So just a note of caution as we look into these.
So do you feel that such fiction normalizes aspects of ourselves that are normally taboo, that people try to keep hidden in like day-to-day life? Or do you feel as though like it romanticizes behaviors that are inherently toxic and that we should try to avoid? Some people may consume such dark romance or even normal kind of books that are not considered dark romance, such as like Colin Hoover, but who mentions abusive relationships. And some people, when it's brought to like, the big screen as like her books have been adapted to, they can start to normalize it and believe that this is what love is, Although like a lot of these protagonists in these films or books display behaviors that would be categorized under the dark triad.
I think this is so relatable. I think what we just said there can apply very well to our younger viewers. Love can look like many different things, and this one depiction of what love looks like or what a relationship looks like is not what every relationship should look like.
And I think Hazel does mention a really good point, and the fact that this, the normalization with media and everything, because of the fact that it's so common nowadays, the youth might end up reading it and think, oh, this is what love looks like. But I think people have to keep in mind that these dark traits, they are very human, because human nature in itself, I don't think we are either good or bad. We have the capacity to be both. So definitely take it with a grain of salt. Maybe some people are into it, but it's really not realistic and should not in any way be normalized.
I agree. I feel like what distinguishes the kind of traits that we all have, the dark traits that we all have, from someone who is considered clinically a psychopath or like who has narcissism personality disorder is like the extent to which it displays. So although everyone has a bit of it in all of us, and it would be good to admit to ourselves and to others that, we're not all only having like, good parts to us. We also have these kind of darker dimensions. What distinguishes it is like, if they display the behavior to such an extent that it interferes in their relationships and causes harm to those in their lives. So I think that's what distinguishes it in the DSM. Like, if they display characteristic and it affects their life, then it becomes like clinical psychopathy. This is a word that I can't pronounce. Psychopathy. So it becomes clinical psychopathy. Yeah. So I think although it's good to normalize, it's also good to keep in mind that they are not the same. Yeah. I have something to ask you guys.
Yeah.
Some people say that in our modern society, a lot of these darker traits are becoming more prevalent. For instance, they say a lot of people in our generation, like our generation is infinitely more narcissistic than previous generations. And even movies like American Psycho and like the cult love, like, the cult of like that, the fandom it has, like demonstrates how a lot of people view these characters that are meant to display dark traits as like something to strive towards, What do you guys feel? What is this distinction between being individualistic and like, being narcissistic?
I think the line is definitely blurred because of how social media is. And I actually had a conversation with one of my friends. So I realized I didn't want to put myself out there. During my youth, I realized I was someone who was actually very shy and I'm very introverted. And of course, as any teenager, any young girl, I was also really insecure. So I spent multiple years trying to take off whatever pictures I had online. And my Instagram was completely empty for a couple of years. But I had this conversation with my friend recently where I was thinking, should I post this? Like, should I be posting me and my friends? Should I post a story? And I wasn't asking, I was just like kind of like talking to myself. And she made a comment that really stuck with me. It was like, it's your social media. It's supposed to be about you. It's supposed to be about your life. You get to pick what you want to post. Yeah. So is that narcissism?
So it is like a very fine line, is it?
I would say it is. It's definitely a fine line. I think just now you brought up a good point. How much does it impact our day-to-day life? I think that's one question that we can ask ourselves. And another thing that we can definitely ask is, what is our intent behind all of this?
I definitely agree with the intent. I feel like one of the key distinctions between what may be considered narcissistic or what is just people living in this day and age using social media is like the intent. So I think like social media, if people use it for the form of communication, if like they're trying to use it to in a way see what their friends are up to and tell their friends what they're doing, then it's more on like just living in this day and age and being like a young adult or a teenager. Yeah. But like if they're very focused on creating a specific image of like who they are and using it more on like building a profile, maybe that's where the intent lies, and that it's more towards like caring a lot on your image. So someone who uses social media in that way might have more traits of narcissism.
I see. So if that's the case, since a lot of influencers create curated content, do you think you would consider them to be narcissists?
Some people say that people who are narcissistic tend to gravitate towards such roles where they would have a lot of power, have a lot of prestige, and be in front of a lot of people. But I guess to a certain extent, it is possible, definitely, for people to not be narcissistic. And it's just part of their branding, like it's just marketing. So
Yeah,
like
that's just their job.
it's just their job. They're doing their job. So I really think that it is impossible to to look at someone's profile and be like, oh, this person is a narcissist, or like this person is not. It's really about like how the person is using it, and only they themselves could know.
Well, surely social media in our day and age does play a big part, and there's a lot of different interactions which we will be addressing more on in our next episode, social media and mental health. Next, let's shift gears to talk about the role of environment in shaping personality. While genetics give us a starting blueprint, it's the environment that often fills in the details. Upbringing plays a significant role. The way we are raised, whether in a nurturing, supportive home or a more chaotic, neglectful one, can profoundly influence traits like emotional resilience, empathy, and even how we handle stress. For instance, children raised in environments that encourage exploration and independence may grow up to be more open and self-assured.
So one thing that I saw online was this video of a father and his daughter, and they were out and they saw this other kid as well with her mom. So his daughter had this desire to want to make friends, and immediately as she started to do that, to initiate her actions to want to play and talk to the other kid, immediately the word shy came out. And this guy, the father, he brought up such a great point, saying how sometimes being quick to label kids being shy might actually discourage them from reaching out and actually trying to socialize and get to know other people. So that word shy, in the context that he brought it, was this inability to connect with other kids.
I guess what you're trying to say is that at childhood, a lot of an individual's personality traits may not be fixed yet, given that they're still growing and learning how to interact with others. But having these terms fixated to them then causes them to behave in a way that would cause a self-fulfilling prophecy. They believe that they are shy and hence they will not interact with other kids, and so they never really learn how to interact with other kids.
Right, yeah, that's so true. And being told that they are shy, they might start thinking, oh, I am shy.
Right, by a trusted adult at
By a
that.
trusted adult.
And also because kids, their way of thinking is very concrete, they're not flexible enough to comprehend that, oh, this adjective, like me thinking, someone else thinking that I am shy doesn't necessarily mean that I am shy. They probably would think, oh, my father thinks I'm shy, that means I am shy, right? It has to be that.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of implications and stuff like that.
Exactly. Especially given that a lot of how we form our personality is by having those around us reflect our personality back to us. And as children, the only people they have are like their core caregivers would be the ones reflecting it to them. So it's very important for parents to know that, you know, they should not immediately fixate certain terms to their child, causing their child to grow to believe that these terms are necessarily true of them.
Definitely, but that's just one aspect of upbringing. Cultural context is another important factor. Think about how cultural values shape personality, like collectivist cultures, which prioritize group harmony and interdependence, versus individualist cultures, which emphasize personal achievement and autonomy. These cultural norms subtly mold how we think, feel, and behave in social settings. Then there are life experiences, which can be as transformative as they are unpredictable. Major life events, whether it be joyful, like starting a family, or challenging, like facing a personal loss, can shift aspects of our personality over time. For example, someone who experiences trauma may develop heightened sensitivity to threats, influencing traits like neuroticism or openness to new experiences. So, what does science say? Twin studies provide fascinating insights. Identical twins share the same genetic makeup, yet when raised in different environments, they can develop strikingly different personalities. This underscores the idea that genetic and environment work hand in hand, with neither being the sole determinant. Longitudinal research also gives us valuable evidence, as these studies, which track individuals over many years, shows how environmental factors like socio-economic status or educational opportunities affect personality development across the lifespan. So, while we can't control the genes we're born with, we can shape our personality through the environment we choose to surround ourselves with and the experiences we seek out. Our personality isn't just who we are, it's also shaped by where we've been and where we're headed to. Alright, so for this next segment,
we are diving into the fascinating question: is personality fixed or fluid? Personality is often thought of as the core of who we are, and in many ways, that's true. Research shows that certain traits like extroversion, conscientiousness, and agreeableness exhibit a high degree of temporal stability, meaning these traits tend to remain consistent over time. This is why we often feel a sense of continuity in our identity, even as we grow older. It's reassuring to think of ourselves as having a stable core. However, personality isn't entirely fixed. Life itself is dynamic, and so are we. Significant life events, such as entering a long-term relationship, becoming a parent, experiencing trauma, or even achieving a major career milestone, can lead to meaningful shifts in personality traits. For instance, research shows that people often become more conscientious and emotionally stable as they transition into adulthood. On the other hand, negative experiences such as prolonged stress or loss might amplify traits like neuroticism or anxiety.
That's really true. During COVID-19, a lot of people experience an increase in neuroticism. But not only can such events change our personality traits can also shape how we interact with such events. For instance, a lot of extroverts tended to be more distressed by the effects of lockdown.
Right, so for me, I tend to be more on the extroverted side. During the lockdown, I was 17, 18 at that point of time. Yeah, so young. Claire, I can see Claire mouthing if you can't hear.
Sorry.
Yeah, it was tough. It was tough transitioning to a different pace in life. I felt like my friends weren't really next to me, and I wasn't looking forward to like when class ended. Yeah, because I guess class is whenever the video call ends. So it was tough. It was much tougher to like go out and like have fun with people and get the energy released with like friends. So a lot of my meetups with friends, so like going out for food, going to like the nearby park, and even just like walking around school, because I think my campus was quite nice to just like walk around. A lot of people will, as we take our quote unquote 5-minute study break, we'll go walking around like the school field and just like walk around and just talk about life. So that couldn't happen anymore. It was tough, but one way that I found worked for me was that I got on a lot of video calls. Like my friends and I would just get on video calls and would just stay there, do work together. And it's just this sense that, hey, my friends are with me. Like their presence is there. And yeah, I wasn't alone. As much as it was an environment where more neurotic behaviors or tendencies might show up more often. But yeah.
I understand with COVID-19 and having so many things change in our daily lives, which brings me to my next point. A supportive partner might encourage someone to become more open or trusting, while toxic relationships could reinforce defensive or avoidant behaviors. This dynamic underscores how our social environment continuously shape our personality. Therapy is another powerful factor in personality change. While therapy doesn't rewrite who you are, it can help individuals develop healthier coping mechanisms, reframe thought patterns, and even shift traits like agreeableness or emotional stability.
So what happens in some therapy sessions, and it really depends on what your therapist does during the session, but most of the time it does bring to your awareness certain situations, certain feelings, certain thoughts that maybe you just didn't have the perspective to see. So your therapist might sometimes bring that to your awareness, and that just gives you the opportunity to make that change. It gives you the opportunity to be aware and to decide what you want to do afterwards. So definitely it's not going to rewrite
Or change your personality. Yeah.
But it gives you the opportunity to do that and to decide and have that self-agency to want to do that.
Definitely, like for cases, like for example, someone working through social anxiety in therapy, they might gradually become more comfortable with social interactions, and with the end game being them being able to efficiently alter their extroversion in certain contexts. Yeah. I think it's also worth noting that
the degree of change can vary, like Isaiah said. Some traits like openness to experiences are more malleable, especially during periods of significant growth or change, such as adolescence or major life transitions. Other traits like extroversion or neuroticism tends to be more stable, and they're rooted in both biology and long-term patterns of behavior, or life events, for example, COVID-19. Yeah. So in short, personality is best understood as a balance between stability and change. While the foundations of who we are remain relatively stable, life has a way of reshaping us in subtle but meaningful ways. This adaptivity allows us to grow and evolve, becoming versions of ourselves that are shaped by our experiences but are still anchored in who we are at our core.
Okay, alright, for this segment of Psych-sip Sessions, we're diving deeper into the concept of personality with some fresh perspectives. To help shape this discussion, I've drawn on insights from some expert commentary from our special guest of the day, Dr. Chu, in the field of personality psychology. This provides a rich foundation for understanding the complexities of personality, and let's break it down to see how these ideas resonate in our daily lives.
Okay, thanks Claire for inviting me over. Hi everyone, I'm Dr. Chu. I teach psychology both at University of Wollongong and University at Buffalo here at SIM, and we are going to be talking more about personality.
Okay, so first question. Why do they say you can't put personality psychologists in the same room?
Well, we have two answers. One, I believe personality psychologists will never agree because of the numerous number of theories and perspectives that, you can come and think about personality.
Right.
Or you can come from another way of looking at it. There are too many egos in one room.
That just shows how complex the topic personality is in the realm of psychology. So, now that that little joke was over, first official question. How can someone use their results from personality tests effectively in their daily life?
I think, first of all, when we think about personality tests, I think we should be all very well aware of whether or not personality tests really, what they can really tell us and, inform us about ourselves. We should be aware of whether or not personality tests can really explain, have more explanatory power, or do they only describe what we already know in the first place, Because what we should be aware of is that when we say that a lot of personality tests have more of a descriptive ability, right? They're mainly just describing what we already know. They already are telling us about existing structures about our personality. So when we talk about descriptive sort of abilities, right, we're talking more about the trait kind of like personality tests, such as the MBTI, the Big Five, they only can tell us, but they don't explain to us, right, how do we actually come to have the personality that we do have actually? Like, why are you introverted, They don't tell us why.
Yeah, that's a good question.
They only tell us that you are introverted. And that's more of a basis of the fact that you self-reported it in the first place, But there are some theories that do attempt to actually try to explain. So some theories allegedly say that we can tell you why you actually come to have the behavior or why you behave in this certain way. Some of them have explanatory powers. So, while not popular, if you recall, Freud's psychosexual model
Right.
does have that kind of attempts to have that kind of explanatory
That was
power.
an attempt.
Freud actually attempts to say that due to certain fixation at each of the stages,
Yes.
right? If you don't overcome, you don't have enough cyclical powers to overcome those conflicts at different stages, you might have developed certain adult, characteristics that are fixed to those stages,
Okay.
Like whether at the oral stage or the anal stage, you might develop, toilet training no good, you might develop more of an anal retentive personality or anal not so, that kind of thing. So it's more of explanatory
Yes,
sort of
yes.
thing. But that's different. Many personalities, even the trait ones, attempt to say that they can explain, but actually they don't. So this sort of thing we have to be very careful. But either way, what we can take from personality tests is that they can confirm what we do know.
Right.
In some sense, maybe say take it with a pinch of salt, because what we can take from them is that it can confirm what we already know, like, because it's self-reported, so it confirms what we do know about ourselves. In other sense, right, how we can effectively use personality tests is, let's say, in workplace situations.
Right.
Personality tests can help you understand whether or not are you going to work well in certain organizations. Like you score very low on extroversion sort of dimensions. Probably you're not someone who's going to, want to do or want to basically, let's say, work in a place that is, needing to spend a lot of social energy. You probably want to be in a workplace that does not require too much social interaction, needing to party after hours, needing to join in on, too many meetings and all that. You probably want less of that.
Yes.
So it gives you more insight on like what kind of environment do you want to work in.
Right.
So it's more that kind of insight sort of thing. So you can maybe use personality tests to do that for yourself.
I
But
agree.
at the end of the day, I think with a lot of personality tests, we need to understand its limitations and take it with a pinch of salt.
I agree. I feel that as personality tests, they can be a really good tool for self-reflection, and if used properly, it can help you grow and understand your own strengths and weaknesses. However, don't just take it, as it is and treat it as gospel.
Yes.
Yeah, so use them as a guide instead to improve your career, maybe decisions, communication, and relationships.
Definitely.
Okay, so next question. So, how are traits like narcissism, part of the dark triad, how are these dark traits studied in personality research?
So let's backtrack a little bit. When we talk about the dark triads, right? The dark triad of personality, we're talking about narcissism, psychopathy, and something called Machiavellianism. They basically form at the heart of it, right? A constellation of three socially undesirable personality. Okay, some call it like so-called the core of what makes someone evil or some kind. But to be very honest, right, I believe if you look into the research and if you look into especially someone's research like Dr. Daniel Jones, right, he actually said that you actually never find someone with all three traits, ironic. Although what we do understand is that there's a great overlap between, let's say narcissism and let's say Machiavellianism and psychopathy, especially between Machiavellianism and psychopathy. Both would demonstrate low empathy, callousness, and so on and so forth. But not everyone's going to have all three. Unlike mainly because you think about this. If you're someone who is very much Machiavellianism personality,
Yes.
right? You're someone who's demonstrating a personality trait that is very manipulative. When we say someone who's very Machiavellianism, you are someone who, defined by this core, idea that the end justifies the means. It means you're willing to go and strategize, reduce impulses
Right.
to ensure that you can meet the end goals. But that's not someone who has more of a psychopathy trait. Psychopathy trait, right, has difficulty with impulses. So these two, right, you're not going to find someone with both of these traits, unlikely. Whereas when we talk about whether or not someone's got narcissism, it's all about what can make me look good, right? So so that's why I say that yes, there is overlap, but you're not unlikely gonna find someone with all three usually. That being said, prevalence in society and in the population, very scary. I think I heard, according to again Daniel Jones, prevalence for all three traits is around like less than 10%, but about 8%, around there.
Okay.
From what I understand, which is quite scary. Yeah, but getting back to your question, how do we study it? Well, individually, each of the traits can be studied, right, with their own so-called measures. But if you want to study all three of them, right, there is two brief measures of the dark triads. And they are known as the Dirty Dozen by Jonathan and Webster, 2010. And there's also something called the Short Dark Triad by Jones and Paulus, 2014. Well, they're called the Dirty Dozen because there's okay, sounds terrible, but it's mainly because there's only about 4 questions per construct. That's why it's very short. It's very short. Okay, but individually, each of the traits, right, have their own measures, like I said. So Machiavellianism, people have done their own research. Main one when you want to check for people, when you want to study it, right, there is the traditional Mach 4, right, which is the one that's most known. There was the one developed in the 1970s. And then there's the more, I think, more recent, when I say recent, I'm talking about 2020. So as recent as it gets, they call it the two-dimensional Machiavellian scale, the TDMS, by Monahan et al., 2020. That one basically tries to say that there are nuances to how we understand Machiavellianism, that when we think of Machiavellianism, right, you can think of it as whether or not you actually view people as being very vulnerable, that we can take advantage of. And also divide the other aspect of Machiavellianism of whether or not would you actually do it? Would you actually take action to actually, so they call it views versus tactics, what they call the two views. So that's what we mean by the different measures. And same thing with so-called narcissism. Narcissism has what they call the narcissistic personality inventory. And then I think there's a lot of research into whether do you need 40 items. And then I think I read that I think there's also the MBTI 8 items. So they're starting to validate whether or not how many, as little items as they can get. And then psychopathy. We do know that psychopathy was originally, the clinical test was by Hare's checklist.
The Hare's checklist.
The Hare's checklist, I think most psychology students would have heard about the Hare's checklist. But I think, right, what we do know is that there are other psychopathic personality inventories. Okay. And I think there's also the Levinson self-report psychopathy skills. I think the one more focused less on the clinical side of things. These are more focused on the personalities side of things as well. Okay. So in terms of the measures, we do need to understand that when we talk about the dark triads, right, these are traits. These are not diagnostic,
Yeah.
These are not diagnostic, so-called, disorders, that people have, you know what I mean? Yeah. And I think that's something we need to be aware of.
So with that said, are there actually ways to identify and manage the negative traits in ourselves or others?
I think when we think about the dark triads, there's a lot of negative connotations.
Yes, for sure.
And I think a lot of researchers and probably a lot of people will think that, it is not nice to hear. I think in the debate of the literature and in the research community, they said that to a certain extent, most of us would have some of these dark triads within us. Especially, I think some of the researchers say that to a certain extent, most of us will have some Machiavellianism in us, whether or not how much would we put into being able to be strategic, to attain our goals. And so some people say that, having a bit of Machiavellianism actually may not be a bad thing. Okay, that's some of the thesis that some researchers like Dr. Daniel Jones, because that's the main one I read for Machiavellianism. So, first thing first, how do we identify? Well, I think the advice is, first of all, we need to eliminate any of the benign situational factors first. You need to make sure that there is actually no other possibilities, no miscoms, no jumping to conclusion, no other factors building up to, why things are happening in the first place. I think also in the case of Machiavellianism, you need to recognize that it's not necessarily always that the person in power is always the one manipulating things. Because we always think that, person who is always engaging in the kind of strategic, downfall of a company, like out to rob the whole company thing is always someone in power. Not necessarily the case. It's not always the case. Right. And I guess always be careful that the so-called ally is really an ally and not the manipulator. But I think at the end of the day, how we can get about it is to recognize that the first thing first is to be able to recognize that you're dealing with one, is to be able to recognize one. You need to identify that you're dealing with one first. I agree.
I feel like the ability to identify and self-awareness.
Yeah, self-awareness. But in your opinion, just out of curiosity, because there's these three dark triads, right? Which one do you think you're least wanting to deal with out of the lot? Narcissist, someone with Machiavellianism, or psychopath?
I think for me, it would definitely be psychopath. Because
Psychopath?
I'm someone who's very empathetic.
Empathetic.
I think narcissist is fine. Like who's
is
not a little self-centered? Come on. Like if life isn't about me, who else is there about?
Okay.
So that part I understand.
Okay.
And I think let me practice saying this word first.
Machiavellianism.
Machiavellianism. Because it's characterized by, the tendency to manipulate here and there. But I feel like, who doesn't want things in their favor?
I'll put it to you how the researcher that I read about, why it depends on the context.
Right.
He said in a dark alley, you are dealing with someone, right, and you think you might get robbed. He said, I'd rather deal with the person with the Machiavellianism. He said, most likely I'll get out of the situation alive.
Definitely.
He said
Just
that
one up them.
you just want to one up them, right?
Yeah.
But he said if it's a company corporate situation, he said I would rather deal with a psychopath.
Definitely.
He said psychopath is probably the one that will probably out themselves first because they have low impulsivity control. And then, the narcissist, eventually their charming self will wear off eventually. So the least problematic of the lot.
Right. But I think just personal life-wise,
Yeah.
definitely I wouldn't really want to deal with psychopaths.
Psychopaths.
Yeah, it would be so hard to have a conversation with them.
No.
No?
Low, yeah, they have low empathy, low impulse control. So it's just horrible either way.
Right. What about you? What's your answer to that question?
I think Machiavellianism is the worst of the lot.
Why? But if you're self-aware, won't you figure it out?
Yeah, but the thing is, you may take a long time to figure out which one's the one.
Really? I think that is actually my toxic trait.
That's your toxic trait.
So I think my personal toxic trait is that
It's a
I think... Okay, maybe that's me. Maybe
That's you. Interesting.
Oh, no.
Okay, I'll get you to take the test later.
No, but actually, I think my toxic trait is thinking that I can outsmart anyone.
You get outsmart.
Trying to manipulate me.
That'll be interesting. That'll be a good one.
Okay, maybe I do score pretty high on the dark triad.
Okay. We can take a test later.
Yes, definitely. That's a really interesting question.
Something to chew about.
Definitely. Okay, so on to our next question. How do you see the study of personality evolving in the next decade?
I think the study of personality will be interesting as it evolves in the next decade. Probably what we want to see is essentially personality traits, right? Moving from less of the unidimensional conceptualization, because now we're seeing a lot of the traits being seen as one-dimensional, especially when we see a lot of the personality being seen introversion, you're only wanting to do, stay at home, do this and that. But I think there's a lot of nuances, to just being introverted or being just very extroverted. I think there's a lot of space and a lot of, freedom to really start to develop are there, more to personality, to just these kind of behaviors and all that. But also, I'd like to know how personality will be shaped with the advent of technology. Would people be actually more extroverted, or actually I find that people are actually getting more introverted? How tech will actually affect personality overall.
Right.
Yeah, so I think in that sense, I think the study of personality would take off in a very different direction. And also in terms of the research methodology, we already see a lot of evolvement. Used to be when we need to run research with personality, we had to hand out paper. We had to get people to fill out pencil and paper tests. But now, we could easily do online testing, which means we got further reach, increase validity, increase, intercultural studies and cross-cultural studies and all that. That will make it very interesting to see, how everything, what kind of results we'll have overall.
I think for me, what I'm the most excited to find out about would be the advances in neuroscience, because that's something I'm very interested in. So I feel because we'll more likely gain deeper insights into biological and neurological underpinnings of personality. I think that's
Oh.
very exciting.
That would be very exciting.
Right. And then there's also the rise of big data and artificial intelligence.
Yes.
So I think that will also allow for more nuanced analyzation of the different personality across different contexts.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, okay. So next, I'll be asking questions that is somewhat related to our next episode that would be on social media and mental health. So, first question, what role does social media play in shaping or distorting how we perceive personality?
I think social media has played an increasing great role in our lives, and especially in our everyday life. And what I think social media has done well is to disseminate research and inform everyday person about what personality theories are about and development in personality research. So, for example, like how we can, inoculate ourselves against Machiavellianism and how it can actually help us thrive in a toxic environment sometimes. That's what they say it can do. But at the same time, I think the problem I see as a potential issue is that social media can also, at the same time, right, if not done well, can disseminate disinformation and misinformation at the same time. Like sometimes we're too quick to say that, oh, this is my personality type, and then we start to typecast it as this is all I am.
Right.
Or they, don't do their research properly. They, don't check their sources well and stuff. And sometimes things can go very badly from there on, You know what I mean?
I agree. I feel like because I'm a victim of this. I'm unfortunately a Gen Z. So social media creates a space where, personalities are often oversimplified. And I feel like it reduces the complexities of human nature. And also everyone, due to mainstream media in general, everyone's somewhat the same. And I was having this conversation with my friend, and we were saying how actually personal style and like having a personality that's somewhat original, it's kind of dead now. And when you hear people talk and how people dress, how people carry themselves, you can tell someone's screen time just based off that. Because they're all so similar nowadays.
Yeah, it's true. But at the same time, I think also it takes quite a bit to be able to translate research and really communicate the science behind the data, for everyday consumption. At the same time, it's not easy. So I think a lot more can be done to be able to really, make things easier for the everyday person to know more about, such important research such as personality, which can be, easily misconstrued.
I agree. I think online personality might differ from your real life personality.
Exactly.
Yeah, and oftentimes we see a more polished version online and definitely don't believe what you see and what you read online for sure.
Definitely.
Okay, so next question. How has the digital age impacted our understanding of personality expression?
Actually, you brought up a very good point just now. I think the digital age has increased our ability to reach wider audience and increase our ways that we can express different facets of ourselves. Like we can choose which face, which personality we want to present to which audience, which brings up new challenges, like which version of ourselves is the so-called authentic self. And then it challenges the idea of authenticity, and as you said earlier, there is the question of, the online versus in-person, like how do we reconcile that? And does that causes so-called misalignment of the self and our personality and all that? So this may impact, so-called personality and our expression, and might also cause like crises and all that in the long run.
Right. Previously, I think maybe a decade ago, there was this influencer who had a whole breakdown because she felt like her real life wasn't reflective of her social media. But I feel like that wouldn't be a case if you actually had self-awareness and if you were aware and had the perception that, oh, like life isn't as it seems online. So when she had that whole mental meltdown online, it was quite
it can be very tragic, unfortunately. But I guess at the end of the day, I think the idea of the online influencer platform is still evolving. I think it's one of those so-called dream of platform that we still don't know where is it going, and I think people are still reconciling like what they want to do.
Yes, and it's so fairly new. The
It is
term influencer
Yeah,
came
sure.
up recently.
Yeah, I think barely a decade, isn't it?
Yeah, it's barely a decade. Like back then, celebrities like Kim Kardashian, they were like influencers of their time, but no one would know that they were called influencers.
No,
Yeah.
and they belong to the cable TV side of things, right? Not exactly online. I think
Right.
considered online. Not exactly, right?
Not exactly.
I think the online influencers belong to the YouTube, TikTok era.
Oh, that's a different way.
Yes, there's a different way.
It's a
Okay, yes,
different
I'm giving up my
Oh
age
yeah,
now.
there was TikTok. Like TikTok's the most recent one, but before that was YouTube.
Yeah, so the different ways, the different genres as we call it, isn't it? Yeah, so we don't know. Like with the advent of different types of tech, that will also impact the different personality expressions as well.
Definitely. Okay, that will be all. Thank you for coming on and sharing your insights with us. It was very fun and very insightful.
Okay, thank you so much, Claire.
So that brings us to the end of today's episode of Psych-sip Sessions. We've covered so much ground, from exploring what personality really is to diving into how it shapes us and how we are shaped by our experiences, relationships, and even in the digital age. Understanding personality isn't just about knowing your traits or taking a test. It's about embracing the balance between who we've always been and who we are constantly becoming. Whether your personality feels rock solid or ever-changing, the beauty lies in the complexity and its potential for growth. I hope these answers sparked some curiosity and maybe gave you some things to reflect on. As we wrap up today's episode, thank you for joining me on this deep dive into personality. Hopefully you're feeling more equipped to embrace your own flaws and all. Special thanks to Isaiah and Hazel for joining us, as well as Dr. Chu. Until next time, take care and stay curious. Bye!